name is Benjamin Young. I'm Big Blue Hat on Twitter. You're welcome to follow me there and ask me questions about PHP and CouchDB together. I, over the last 3 years, worked on a content management system called Blue Ink, and in the last 6 months or so began rewriting it onto CouchDB after spending about a year and a half really getting to know Couch and what it might offer for the CMS. I also used to be on the .project team and have recently moved to the Web2 project team. If you're unfamiliar with those, they're PHP MySQL project management platforms of sorts. And yeah, I'm happy to still be involved in PHP pretty heavily. I've got other little experiments on GitHub, and all of these underlined texts are links, and they'll at least be in the PDF when we put them up. Don't know if you can click them during the screencast or not, but you're welcome to try. And you can also contact me at benjamin@couch1.com anytime you like. And my role at Couch1 is user advocate and user experience engineer. So if there's anything you see that we produce that needs a UI improvement, please just email me directly and I'll be happy to work on it. Okay, we should be getting slide number 3 here shortly. There we go. I'm also the organizer of an event called RESTfest that O'Reilly and Couch1 have both sponsored, and we discuss REST-based APIs and building them and communicating with them. Because CouchDB has a REST API, we spent a lot this past year, a lot of time on CouchDB, and it was really great. So we'd love to have all of you join us next year. We'll cover more Couch. So why I love CouchDB is because I think it solves a lot of problems that we face every day that have kind of been ignored by most of computing. A lot of that is related to data integrity, and moving the data around. Data is lonely, in my opinion. Sorry about the audio, guys. Hopefully some of you are getting it better. Data, I think, is lonely and locked up in applications and on web services, and various applications use different formats and tie things down in either binary, or if they use text, it's all very unique and hard to get at, and most desktop applications don't have API. They certainly don't usually implement sync, or if they do, you're often in a situation where you'll lose data or constantly have to be curating that data and picking which copy of what data wins, and solving problems like that. Open source applications are a little bit better because you can usually get to how the data is formatted, and you can manage that, change that if you want, convert it, whatever. But a lot of those depend on relational databases and the queries, which are the super important piece of an RDBMS for getting your data back out into some consistent format, are usually tangled up in PHP code, or maybe it's in an ORM, and you really are going to have a hard time extracting data from that without forking the project or something like that. So the queries are stored in the code, usually. Sometimes they are stored as views in MySQL or Oracle or whatever. But growth and change of those queries is tricky. So CouchDB, for me, has solved a lot of those problems. If you're still getting onto the Couch and haven't yet downloaded it or installed it, these are 3 good options. The Couch1 hosting and OS installers page has a lot of information on how to do the bottom 2 options, as well as some downloads for Mac, Windows, and even Android. Just a quick intro to CouchDB and what it is overall and how it's different. CouchDB has the following superpowers. It can do replication, so your data is less lonely. You can move it around from CouchDB instance to CouchDB instance. You can you can filter out who gets what data and where it goes and all those important things. That's something that is probably the most unique feature about CouchDB, and the thing that opens up new doors for interesting forms of architecture that don't depend on a stay open connection like we're trying to do here, where everyone has to have the same sort of bandwidth. The asynchronous nature of CouchDB is pretty fabulous, and that's seen best in the replication system that it implements. It is a document-based database or document-centric database. The advantage that gives is that it does allow you to deal with your data in the same way you would normally in real life, quote unquote. You think about documents in real life not being normalized as they would be in a relational database. You don't tear up all your receipts and all your invoices and business cards and put all the addresses in one stack and all the names in another stack and whatever, and write some random string of numbers on the back to work as your key, so the next time you put this receipt back together, you know where to get all that data. In real life, we just have a stack of receipts and invoices and business cards or whatever, and if you wanted to collect all the addresses out of that, you would go through each one and pull out the addresses. And we'll talk more about how CouchDB sort of implements that everyday concept in its API and how it's built. It also has a Failfast architecture, sort of owing to its Erlang heritage and the fact that the bulk of it is written in Erlang. Couch actually stands for a collection of unreliable commodity hardware. Its stateless nature, because of the HTTP API, allows things like replication, which in other implementations and other software is usually a stay open connection where you're constantly sending packets and having to check on each other and make sure you're there. Because CouchDB is stateless, the packets that are sent back and forth can be interrupted, the network can go down, and you can pick up later and finish off your replication. It also has process-centric memory management thanks to Erlang, so you are getting memory heaps per function or per process that's being run. So it's less likely that you'll be running into virtual memory overage or whatever as a Java app would do. And I've already mentioned the stateless API. Should be getting another slide here. Am I still coming through fine? Any complaints? There we go. Replication. Replication in CouchDB is built on a multi-version concurrency transaction system, so that there is a version of every document that you put into CouchDB stored, but that's only for transactions. That's not meant for versioning. But it is what allows CouchDB to do replication. Replication also safely merges databases by keeping your document versions intact and letting any other database pick up from the version it has and merge in and know that, yeah, it's safe to pull these changes in. If the document does conflict, then you as the web developer will have both documents, both two that conflicted during replication, and you can then put them back together. They'll be marked as a conflict, and there's even a query to pull up. These are the conflicting documents, and you need to address those. But that is far more rare in the CouchDB world than it is in, like, say, the BlackBerry desktop sync, which is my most recent painful experience with sync. But there are plenty of others. So the documents aren't compared directly in CouchDB. It uses a combination of the UUIDs and the revision IDs, and we'll look at those bits of information as we get into the document API. So documents versus tuples. Tuples are what relational databases use, and MySQL, for one, which probably a lot of us use since we're a PHP crowd. Tuples are just a way of breaking down data into a series of columns and rows and thinking about data separately from the document that it came from. Typically, most data does come from a document of some kind. When you use a web page, it's obviously a document, but then even when you're using a form, you're technically filling out a document. And that's a great concept, and that's a concept that we got rid of early on in the relational database world, in part because of technology being relatively in its infancy in that regard. And so we had storage issues, and we wanted to normalize data and break it apart and make sure we weren't keeping the same address multiple times. But on your desk, you have a stack of repetitive denormalized data, and you can normalize it when you need to, but each of those documents is sort of sacrosanct, and it's the thing itself, and you can at any time pull out that invoice and you've got all the information that you need. CouchDB operates on this model. As I've learned about CouchDB, to think or and document into that drawer regardless of its format, because CouchDB is schemaless. So I don't have a drawer just for invoices and another drawer just for receipts. They all go into one drawer, and I can parse them out however I feel like later. Yeah, if you do have questions, please do prefix them with a Q. The other ones will probably be missed. Thanks, I see them coming in. That's fabulous. We'll address them probably at the end. Or if I hit a lag, I will read through those and we'll chat about them. So there's no need to denormalize your data or break it into smaller pieces. And we'll look at MapReduce for going through all those documents and pulling out just the pieces that you need. We'll buzz through this real quick, but the Failfast architecture I mentioned a lot earlier. The append-only database, though, is particularly interesting if you're managing a server and running PHP and CouchDB together. You probably would have liked to, when you were using MySQL, just copy the file out while it's being written to, and know that once it's done being written to, you would have the whole file backed up. That is how CouchDB works, because it's only appending to that database file. So you can initiate a copy command and then dump all kinds of files and attachments into that document or into that database while it's being backed up. And as soon as that stops, the copy command will finish, and you will have, as of that point, a backup made. Whereas with MySQL, there's a hot copy thing, and there's always another way that you have to do things to get something done. And I keep saying MySQL. This is often true of most relational databases. MySQL is just the world I come from. It's not trying to harp on one single database or throw it under the bus at all. It's been good to me for years, and I'm glad it exists. And there have been times when I enjoyed using it. So, yeah, just for the record, it's a general problem with how a lot of things are built. And CouchDB is solving a new set of problems. So if you have CouchDB installed, start your couches, and this is a pretty fabulous couch. It's not something Couch One offers yet, but maybe I'll talk to Anna and see if we can, make a couple of those. Usually, you just type CouchDB. If you downloaded the Mac version, there's a CouchDB X icon it's CouchDB X.app. If you're familiar with Mac, just click it. It'll be there. It has an embedded Safari, and it's probably the smoothest experience that you could have. For the rest of you, just CouchDB. It'll be up. You'll see time to relax, and hopefully it will be. The first thing you should do after you get it running is go to localhost or 127.0.0.1 and port 5984, and then _utils. That will get you Futon, which is essentially the PHP myadmin of the CouchDB world. It lets you view your databases, see what documents you have in there, edit those documents, create queries, save the queries into design documents, and run the queries and view different parts of it. And it's all around very helpful for getting in quickly. The other great thing about Futon, and because CouchDB offers an HTTP API, Futon uses JavaScript and HTTP, of course, to communicate with CouchDB. And so if you have Firebug installed in Firefox, you can pick up Firebug and watch what Futon does each time you request something. So if you bring up the database, you'll see the GET request. If you create a document, you'll see the put request. and on and on and on. You might have to persist those in Firebug. But at any rate, it's a great way to learn what's actually being sent by Futon and what's coming back. And then you can often just copy and paste those, or the PHP equivalent of the JavaScript. You're also welcome to cheat out of the code in the tests. That's all Apache licensed JavaScript code. And JavaScript and PHP aren't that different. So here comes another slide, I think. Maybe there already. So let's take a quick look at the API. It's one of the easiest APIs I've ever used, and so in my mind, it's just another time to relax. Everything has a URL in CouchDB: the documents, the database, the MapReduce or the design document, which stores the MapReduce queries. It has a URL. Each of the queries where you retrieve the data from has a URL. Tons and tons of pieces of CouchDB's API are exposed on their own URL, which is very RESTful. Everything is a document, so you're always going to be getting back a JSON document, along with some HTTP status information and some headers and helpful things that we'll look at soon. So yeah, it's REST and very relaxing. The basic API looks like this. You get something to read it, you put it to create or update it, you delete it to delete it, and you post to do bulk operations or append style procedures. We'll see how that shakes out. So it's the beautiful simplicity of REST. JSON documents look like this if you're unfamiliar with them. PHP 5.2 and up do support JSON natively with JSON encode and decode, and that's really what everyone should be running according to the PHP crowd, or the PHP team anyway. Prior to that, there are raw PHP libraries, and I do have some PHP 4 sites running places that I just haven't had time to migrate, and I understand there are lots of times like that. So if there's a situation like that, there is an option for you to encode and decode JSON data. A little searching will pull those up pretty easily. So JSON to PHP objects look like this. We're just going to skim through this, but JSON decode with a raw JSON document gets you back a standard object, which confused me a little bit because I was expecting array notation, or at least the object to implement array access, which it doesn't. But regardless, that's how you would echo the width variable's second key. And then you can pass a second parameter, true, and that will show you it'll output the whole thing as an array, which is my personal preference. But you can pick either one, and I believe they're both iteratable and have all those nice features. So some quick curl command line overview. If you're unfamiliar with curl, I think it's very useful on the command line. I don't use it in PHP. It's some of the scariest code in PHP. It's just hard to parse. It sort of implements its own set of jargon or verbiage on top of HTTP that's kind of shackling. But curl on the command line is pretty obvious. The X parameter lets you define a method, and those can be just about anything. D is for your data, and you can put in a straight-up document, like a string document, like JSON will be. Or you can do, as you see at the bottom, you can do binary data or even a file that would contain the string document. So this is great for adding attachments to documents in CouchDB. This is also probably the easiest, simplest way to get up and running with testing CouchDB if you have curl. Windows users may not have that. There are certainly other options, other HTTP consoles. And here are a few that you can use. These would take some more install time. If you're on OS X or Ubuntu or any other Linux distro, you already have curl, so those would be fastest to get up and running. The poster extension for Firefox is quite fabulous. I use it probably more than any of these others just because it's right there next to Firebug. However, if you install it and you're watching this webcast through Firefox, you'll probably have to restart. So we'll miss you, but it might be worth doing if you're going to play with that during the webcast. The other list, they're all pretty great. Charles Proxy does cost money, but it's pretty highly reviewed by those who have used it. Here is how to create a database. It doesn't get a whole lot simpler than that as APIs go. Oh, and for the record, we aren't going to cover the authentication piece of the API. There are certainly documents that go through this entire thing. I'm trying to just bounce through it quickly to give you an idea of how it works in general. HTTP Basic is implemented by any decent HTTP client library for PHP, and that is the primary route that CouchDB uses. It does also offer OAuth and cookie authentication, and we can chat about that at the end if there's time or if anyone has questions. But this is how you create a database, assuming you're authenticated, and CouchDB will come right back and give you a 201 created status as well as this little JSON document. We're just going to be looking at the JSON documents in this presentation because the HTTP status codes are, for the most part, exactly what you'd expect. And I'll show you the for the most part bit as when we get there. Once you've created this database, you can get it again, and it will show you its name, how many documents are in it, how many you've deleted, and some other information that is related to replication. You can delete it again, and if you do, you probably want to recreate it if you're going to use this for testing. But so far, nothing fancy, just putting and deleting, which is very relaxing to me. There's no SOAP packets, no complicated binaries to download and install alongside of your database or anything like that. Just raw HTTP. So it's already there. I'm getting a little bit of slide lag. There we go. Here's how to create a document. The only addition we have now is that we're also sending a JSON document. I just saw the can you link to the authentication API. The best introductory information is going to be in the CouchDB definitive guidebook from O'Reilly. You can go to guide.couchdb.org if somebody wants to type that into the chat. That'd be preferred. When you create the document, try and stay on task. When you create the document, you get another 201 created status, and you get back the document. I left out the, you get back this response. You don't get the document back. You get back that, yeah, it came back successfully, okay, true, the ID that you put into the URL, and then you get this revision ID. If you're going to continue to work with that document, you need to hang on to that revision ID for updating it. You can also get the document again if you put that in one session and you come back later and want to update it. You can also use head, which won't get you the document, but it will get you the revision ID as an E tag. And that's, again, outlined in more thorough documentation. So here's the document that we just created, and hang on to that rev. Here's how we update the document, or it's an attempt to, but I left out the rev to show you what would happen because this is a common pitfall and one that I've made countless times, just because I forget. So you need to have the rev in the document when you create it, and that's the only thing you have to add. So it's generally, if you just got the document and you change something about it and want to put it back again, that's the easiest way. And typically in PHP, that's what you'll be doing. But if you want to go lighter on the server and not get the whole document, you already have some of the data and you know where it's going to go in the document that's already there, you know, there are ways to get around that if you've got the document stored elsewhere but don't know the revision. You can use head or something like that. So after you put it, it comes back and tells you the other revision ID, which you'll need again. Deleting follows that same pattern. If I try and delete it without a revision, I can't, because it needs to know that I'm serious about this and I really want to delete it. And so passing it in as the rev query parameter will let me delete it. One thing to remember, though, is that databases don't require the revision ID to be deleted, and we'll take a look at that in a second. So it is actually easier to delete your database than it is to delete the document, and it's not typically something that you'll accidentally do in your PHP code, but you may accidentally do it if you're playing around with curl on the command line, as I have done. So just a word of caution. If I get the document back, I do get a 404 error, and it says that it's deleted. And if I get this November 18th document, it says that the document is missing because it never existed. I'm very into REST, and I think this should actually be a 410, the first one, because it was there, so that should actually say that it's a 410 gone error, and I plan to report that bug probably this week, I hope, and hopefully there's some code with it too. Who knows? And as you use CouchTV, if there's anything that you find that you feel should be different, please do use the bug tracker and tell them about it. I've sent several bugs through there even before coming to Couch One, and gotten at least good feedback and explanation of why things are implemented that way, and often that was all I really needed, was to understand the logic behind it. But please do get involved. We'd love to have you. So that's the basics. Here are a few more URLs that you've probably been looking at. You can upload binary attachments, which we'll look at in the architecture section, and these are just some more URLs. We'll check out the changes feed a little later on as well. MapReduce queries, these are written in JavaScript, so we're not going to spend too much time on them, but you will need to learn how to use them. There are previous presentations, Intro to CouchTV, which covered a lot of this in more depth, that present those. But basically, it's how you write your queries. So on the left here, we've got a list of documents. This is the map function that checks to see that the doc has a user and that it has points. And if it does, it outputs them again. This lets you distinguish which documents are where, and it always outputs a key and a value. And again, I'm not going to go too deep. Just keep us moving. Here's a reduce query. All it's doing is summing the values. Values is an array of all the values that are returned on the left in this map output section. The default reduce request is in the bottom right, and that's going to be the full reduce. You can do group true, and it'll group it by key and get you more interesting data, perhaps. PHP plus CouchDB, I think, are better together than apart. Here are some CouchDB clients. CouchDB's API is just HTTP, so you don't have to have a straight-up CouchDB client, but you may want to. It does help with auto encoding, decoding JSON, inline attachments. Maybe it offers OAuth token management or authentication. SAG, which I've contributed to, does have cookie authentication now, and it also does caching. And caching, to me, is a super important one because CouchDB does it so well. It would be really nice if the PHP libraries would use the e-tags to cache things, so you're not hitting your CouchDB more often than you need to be. And then changes feed watching is something that would be nice, a nice to have in a CouchDB thing, so you don't have to implement that or re-implement that again. SAG for CouchDB is the one I mentioned earlier. It's saggingcouch.org, I believe. I'm not sure if Sam's in the room, but if he is, he's the one to talk to about it. You can check him out on GitHub. That's under the Apache license, which I'm a fan of as well. PHP on Couch is another one that has I think a more fluent interface than SAG. And I do like a lot of what it does. It is GPL v2 or, at your option, version 3. But that could be a problem if you're developing MIT, Apache, or more open, under a more open license or a commercial license. So just something to consider as you move ahead. Beyond there are giants, and by what I mean by giants are more complicated libraries that do extra things for you, not just the heavy lifting, quote unquote, of parts of the CouchDB API, but they also do or attempt to do like ODM in on the bottom doctrine one that stands for Object Document Model or Management, perhaps. At any rate, it makes it a little more complicated in my mind because it removes you from the relaxing simplicity of CouchDB's API. So I like to stay closer to metal. SAG doesn't hide too much of it. PHP on Couch doesn't hide too much of it. So those, to me, are really great libraries. these other ones are not bad libraries. They just are bringing a lot of extra stuff. PHP Object Freezer bringing the most. That's by Sebastian of, trying to remember, PHP unit fame. And it actually lets you serialize an object and keep it on Couchman and pull it back out. Sorry, yeah, thank you, whoever looked up the PHP on Couchman. Yeah, and if any of my links go to live.apple.com, that's the default in Keynote, and so I apologize. So HTTP clients have the advantage that they are all you really need, and you do likely have one handy or can get one pretty simply and quickly and get into it if you know HTTP. It does require you to have a better understanding of what is in CouchDB and its API and how it works, but that's a good thing. And it will help you with your HTTP skills, which is another good thing. So I recommend that everyone try it and try using CouchDB straight from HTTP so you can see how simple it really is, and then entrust your future to one of these libraries. Curl, I avoid. As I mentioned earlier, it's kind of messy and hard to read. And lines to output, lines of code to result is really quite high. The Pickle HTTP or Pickle HTTP library looks a lot better than curl. It is a Pickle extension though, so you do have to compile it. You may not have that option. The docs are a little sparse. There's the core docs on php.net, but there's not the comment community around that or the blogging community for that. So it's a lot harder to get into. Then HTTP and HTTP request 2 look and feel very similar. So if you use either one of those, you can almost move between them without too much pain. And I believe all of the major PHP frameworks have some sort of HTTP library with them. I know CakePHP, CodeIgniter, and Symfony do. Some client suggestions, I would go with HTTP, and I would pick it based on flexibility. You do want to be able to use things like copy. There's discussion of us possibly implementing patch. CouchDB can be made to listen for other methods. Takes some hacking, but it can be done. And depending on what you're wanting to do, you want to get as close to, if you're using an HTTP client, you want to get as close to the metal as you can so that you can use all the features of HTTP and not be restricted to, sorry, client library, whatever, only implemented get, post, put, and delete, because there are other ones like head and options that, and trace even, that you may find a use for. And so, go with something that's flexible and easy to use, hopefully. The CouchDB ones, I recommend SAG because I like its license and what it's got implemented currently. PHP on Couch, again, looks fabulous. I'll probably use it on a GPL project at some point, just so I can get a taste for it. So some architecture options. We're running out of time, so I'm going to keep talking fast. These are the 4 different options that I see for using CouchDB and PHP together. The 3-tier architecture is pretty typical. It's what we're doing now with PHP MySQL. You have a browser, PHP, and a web server, and then MySQL. You'd, in this case, just be replacing MySQL with CouchDB. It is sort of the more traditional model. The 2.5 tier architecture is one I want to spend some time on. That's the browser plus CouchDB plus PHP working as a document listener of sorts that would act on changes that happen in the browser or happen in the database through the changes feed, most likely. Another option is 2-tier. That's just the browser and CouchDB together, which is how apps that run in Android, if you've got CouchDB, you can write if you've got CouchDB on Android, you can write, it's called a Couch app, and that is just JavaScript, HTML, CSS, whatever, running outside of CouchDB inside your phone, and it's fabulous. Takes some geeky setup time at this point, but it is definitely cool to be able to replicate your application. However, PHP is not really part of that mix, so we're not going to look at it today. And there are other webcasts that cover that in more depth. And the CouchDB book also goes into some pretty deep depth with that. It is possible to use PHP within CouchDB in place of JavaScript, but that takes a good lot of setup, and you don't always know that another CouchDB that you might want to replicate with, for instance, the CouchDB on Android, it may not have PHP and it currently doesn't. So it's not really something, right now it's not really something to take too seriously. The other one I like is zero tier, which is just PHP and CouchDB on your local machine, and then you lean on CouchDB to do your replication out to other computers. So PHP would be used to find files, convert them, and dump them in as attachments or something. Here's a 3-tier architecture. Again, you can mix it with mod rewrite or reverse proxy. If you're bringing it up alongside a MySQL database-based application and replacing pieces of it, this is probably the best way to go. 2-tier, again, no PHP, so we're just going to skip it. couchapp.org is probably the thing to look at. 2.5 tier, again, depends on the changes feed. There is an external API that's getting a lot more beefed up that would let you use requesting through Couch and its HTTP API to run external processes in PHP, Python, whatever. But of course, in PHP for this group. Command line utilities could be written in PHP to work with CouchDB. They may or may not need UI, because you could run them as cron jobs on your iTunes folder to pull all your MP3s out maybe and dump them into CouchDB, and then you can replicate that to your wife's computer and she can pull it down. Whatever. The 3-tier architecture, again, is traditional. I keep moving it. This app will let me. There we go. So typically you're running CouchDB only on localhost. It doesn't listen in this case, typically, on a public IP address. That's also the default it's also the default when you install CouchDB. It's only listening on localhost and on port 5984. And you can change that and have it listen on any IP address or another specific public one. But with a 3-tier, typically it acts just like MySQL does and stays hidden from public site. And then you use PHP to communicate via localhost, assuming they're on the same server. If they're not on the same server, that changes that, of course. PHP is doing the serving of the compiled web pages, pulling data from CouchDB and other places. And Apache or somebody else is probably serving the CSS and JavaScript. You can use Couch for that. But typically this 3-tier architecture is in use when you're migrating from an old RDBMS app to a CouchDB app. One app that follows this model that is a CouchDB-based app is Analog. Go to analog.com, and it uses the Lithium framework plus CouchDB to create this chat IM sort of page thing, which is pretty fabulous. It's fun to use. So yeah, and your current web app. Okay, let's see if this is there. It goes. So yeah, said all that. 2-tier, we're going to skip that. 2.5 tier is the one I'm probably the most excited about right now. It does allow for asynchronous architectures. You can look up Jan Leenert's CouchDB asynchronous architectures webcast from a couple months ago, and that one covers it in far more depth. But I think it's a great fit for PHP and CouchDB because CouchDB does offer this changes feed that PHP can be listening to take actions on, like resizing images, maybe running compaction on CouchDB when it gets too big or something, sending email, whatever, things that CouchDB doesn't currently do. Here's a sample of the changes feed. Each of these results are on their own line, and you can long poll this and it'll stay open, and you can just watch for new lines. But with PHP, I recommend using, well, again, here's the CouchDB book covers it as well, and there should be a link to Jan's presentation. I recommend using cron jobs with PHP, mostly because PHP's got a little bit of a bad track record for long-running processes. So I would pull them up, see what's changed since last. If you put it in a cron job, it can hop online, check what's changed, act on those changes, and then log back off and run again next time the cron job happens. This is a way that I'm playing with email. There's Aaron Miller online has created a thing called Couchman that does this sort of thing in Clojure. And I'm trying to do the same thing in PHP. And basically it would check email addresses and then pull the emails out, turn them into JSON, and stick them into CouchDB. And that's the kind of thing that CouchDB doesn't offer currently, is the ability to communicate with outside APIs or protocols. And it's a database, so I don't know that it should right away. And it may never. The PHP can also check MapReduce queries just to get key pieces of information to maybe email back to you or somebody else, maybe not even out of the changes feed. The zero-tier architecture is sort of headless PHP, although it could be built with something like PHP GTK or Platypus on macOS 10 to build a desktop application in PHP. That has its own history, I realize, but I like to use PHP for command line tools. So I've got one I'm playing with now that pulls out the exif data out of an image, serializes it as JSON, and dumps it into CouchDB. So I can type this PHP file, give it a file path to an image, and the image and its metadata are put into CouchDB for later, like Flickr type UI to be added at some point. So moving data into CouchDB, probably from an RDBMS. Sorry. There we go. There's some strategies to take. You can use PHP to dump your JSON representations. This has some huge advantages because you're denormalizing essentially your MySQL data back into a document format, and then you're putting that document format into CouchDB and then operating off of the document going forward. So it does take some more time because you have to think through the process of what is my data really like what would it look like if I printed it all out and wanted to have it all as documents. And then how do I want to query it within CouchDB and things like that. And it does take a good bit of familiarity with CouchDB's API for that, but moving to Couch does anyway, or anything else. The bulk docs API can be used for inserting a bunch of these documents once you've got them built. You could do this a document type at a time. A friend of mine is doing this with a Drupal app. He's got user documents and authentication and profile management happening in CouchDB, and Drupal's handling everything else that Drupal handles. You could also use CouchDB for attachments. You could play with some load balancing options there and actually put the binary uploads into Couch versus into PHP, and then just use PHP to process the attachments, make thumbnails or whatever. Or another interesting option is to create a sort of a parallel REST API that is unique to your document set, but looks a lot maybe like CouchDB's API. So you can switch your JavaScript to start, if you're doing an Ajax app, presumably. You can switch it to act like it's going to act when it's on CouchDB, and that's something I've played with in the old versions of PHP, or old versions of Blue Ink. There are some obstacles. CouchDB is at its core a new way of thinking, especially if you come from the MySQL relational database world. That's going to be your biggest challenge, is changing into the document in the MapReduce mode. It's not impossible, and you sort of have this aha moment when it finally comes, and it's worth getting to. But it is challenging at the beginning. Query migration is probably the trickiest part beyond that. Like, even once you understand it, knowing, like, this is the data that I actually need, and this is the format I actually need it in, it's not just retype this SQL query, because it's completely different. So you can't just migrate your joins or say, like, you select queries, it's probably fine, but even though they're going to take rewriting into functional JavaScript, But you may find that by doing that, you strip out a lot of the cruft and can hunt down a lot of odd queries that maybe you don't need, or maybe you could consolidate. And I've certainly seen that in thinking through migrating. As I rewrite Blue Ink, I've been thinking through, okay, I didn't need to architect it this way. I've got way too many joins. That explains why that's not working as nicely as it should. And once I get into these documents, I may not even need a query. I can just get the document and be done with it. So it's, as your thinking changes, your approach will change as well. A catch that that you kind of have to plan for is that your database ID, because you're probably using auto increments. If you're using UUIDs in MySQL, you probably save yourself a lot of pain. If you're using auto increments, you're either going to have to go back and put in UUIDs, perhaps, if you're going to migrate them directly. You're basically just going to have to think through how you're going to, what you're going to call these documents when they get in there. You could, depending on what it is, you could use timestamps or usernames or something like that, but it certainly won't be table name dash ID. At least it could be that, and CouchDB is not going to stop you, but architecting with that in your past will be painful in the future if it's not in the present. So in conclusion, I think PHP and CouchDB are much better together. I think PHP does offer a lot that CouchDB can't do or doesn't do of its own choosing. And PHP has a history of building web apps quickly, and CouchDB has a shorter history, because it's not been around that long, of having a super easy API. And coupling those two things, I think it's one of the easier databases to get into. And if your mind can harken all the way back to when you were getting into MySQL and writing alter queries and joins and things like that, CouchDB will feel a lot easier for you. And hopefully migrating your app, as you get to that as you get to that place where it really just clicks, hopefully your way forward with migrating your app will feel that way as well. So I'm done, and I'm up for questions in 3 minutes. I'm just going to read through these questions, unless Catherine's on and wants to MC.
No, Benjamin, if you want to read them yourself, go ahead.
Okay, sure, whichever's fine. Are we doing okay on time?
Yeah, I think we have a little time. We're almost out, but why don't you?
Okay, I'll try and blast through these then. The first question that's recorded here is sorting versus reassembling performance. Okay, this was back on the documents and tuples slide, comparing the sorting of documents versus reassembling them. One key difference is that CouchDB does store all its queries in an index in that append-only database file. So it's a pretty quick lookup, and it's also stored on disk, and it also gets HTTP tags, which means it can be cached. So your query results, if they haven't changed, are going to be a simple GET request, and once you've gotten it, if it doesn't change, and your PHP app or library implements caching, or you're using a browser or whatever, you're going to get a 304 not modified back, which will let you just keep going with the data that you've got, assuming you've got it cached. So performance, as far as like run the query before it's ever been run before, CouchDB will be slower, but CouchDB doesn't operate that way and doesn't want you to operate that way either, because that doesn't scale. So we put it on disk and we cache it and let you know, like I say CouchDB does this, and let you retrieve it in that fashion, and it only throws in the new documents as they come and doesn't rerun the whole query. So in MySQL, typically you rerun the whole query every time somebody asks for it. So it's a different mode of thinking again. So someone has Oracle 10G and wonder if they can export it straight to CouchDB. I wish it were that simpler. Not that I know of. unless you're using MVCC and somebody's written a way to replicate between 10G, but I don't know if 10G offers MVCC. I know Postgres does, and there are some other databases that do, and there are people looking into the possibility of a compatible replication API. If those can be written, Palm has written one for WebOS that allows CouchDB to replicate with a WebOS device. So maybe somebody's done that. Maybe you could do that. I'm not sure. I don't know who asked the question. The example shows localhost. Is Futon available from remote connection over port 5984? No, only if you tell it to be. So in the configuration, if you're in Futon and click on configuration, you can change the port number to, or change the port number too, but you can change the IP address to 0.0.0, which will listen on any IP address. Thank you, Jim. And you can also put in a specific IP address if your device has multiple IP addresses and you want this one to be the one Couch listens on. So it's not public by default, but you can certainly make it that way. There are far too few OAuth how-tos for CouchTV. The question was, are there any OAuth how-tos? There are a lot being written. There are a lot of people interested in it. I, for one, would really like to see examples of the PHP OAuth component with CouchDB or any of the OAuth libraries. I believe Zen has one. I'd love to see more sample code. It's just something people haven't blogged about. If they've implemented it, we haven't heard about it. And I'd like to see more work done there too, and would be happy to contribute if anyone wants to get that ball rolling. But there are more being written currently because it is of interest to a lot of people. Ubuntu, for one, because they use OAuth with CouchDB. Seems that access to DB equals managing revs of multiple documents. Whoever asked that question, could you elaborate in the chat, and I'll come back to that one. Are those Drupal modifications open source? Are the Drupal modifications to make it work with CouchDB public? More or less, I helped this friend of mine out by building a little, like, very terrible little app called Slouchin. If you go to github.com/bigbluehat/slouchin, SLOUCHIN, it uses cookie authentication to allow you to connect to any PHP app that this might be in front of using the user authentication provided by Couch via cookie authentication happening under the covers via localhost. So it's not on a public IP address, presumably, or whatever. Anyway, it's that's where it is if you want to dig into the code. I'm going to keep going. The Drupal mods, such as they are, aren't there currently. He's using SAG, and it's just like any other PHP app. He just communicates with Couch when he needs to and doesn't when he doesn't. But it's not like a snap-in, like move all your Drupal data off, if that's what you're hoping for. There is somebody working on getting Drupal to store some of its data, at least in Couch, but I'm not sure how far along that is. 2.5 tier architecture equivalent to triggers in RDBMS. Any problem with that? I'm trying to see if these go together. Any problem with SQL injection? I got you. Injection type problems. No, not that I know of. J. Chris Anderson is lurking in the chat, and he could answer that better in the chat or offline somewhere. You're welcome to email me, but as far as I know, there isn't. Someone would have to get, well, here's a good for instance. The JavaScript that runs inside your database, inside the design doc, doesn't do any document editing itself. So your queries are only ever read. It's not like SQL that mixes lots of things, data definition and querying and modification all into one package. You can't write JavaScript in the MapReduce that's going to delete a document. And JavaScript and JSON are all you're ever putting into CouchDB. There is the update handler, which would be the one place that I would wonder about that, but I think it could only work on one document. And again, your code could solve for that. It's not like somebody's going to sneak in a whole string of JavaScript into your JSON and you're going to run it, because you typically don't execute at all what you get from a user inside CouchDB because it's not typically executable. It's JSON. You can have them, of course, send JavaScript functions in their JSON, or they may try, but you don't have to run that, and typically there's no reason to, and that would be a really strange architecture choice at this point in CouchDB's history. So, at any rate, I don't think that's a problem. But somebody with more history with Couch could certainly put that to rest. Can I compare Couch to Mongo usage cases? Yeah, I would use Mongo as a cache that I could query, similar to Memcache or MemcacheDB or something like that. I wouldn't trust it with my family photos, for instance, or I wouldn't trust it with the CERN's Large Hadron Collider data or the BBC's personalization data, because it can be tweaked maybe to be less volatile, but it gets its speed from keeping things in memory. And CouchDB does that very, very little, and we actually recommend that you turn that off. So you're writing straight to disk, and your data loss is very, very avoidable. At any rate, CouchDB its intention is for you to relax. So it's focusing on keeping your data, not losing it. And it's a priority, and giving you the ability to move it around. Why don't I trust MongoDB? Too many war stories of people losing large amounts of data. There's actually, I live in rural South Carolina, in the upstate of South Carolina near Greenville, which is a fabulous city, and you all should come visit. But a friend of mine here, we've got a decent-sized web developer community, but we're certainly not Silicon Valley or even the Northeast. And a friend of mine had a guy he was working with who was actually rewriting a MongoDB database application back into PHP MySQL because the company lost just a ton of data in a short period of time with Mongo. And that burnt them badly enough to go back, not even go back to, but rewrite this new application on PHP MySQL. And that kind of made them averse to a lot of things. So I would trust Mongo as a cache and give it all kinds of things to process for me in that way. But I would trust CouchDB with my family photos, for instance, which are pretty important to me. So, any other questions? Catherine, is there anything you'd like to say?
Well, I want to thank you, Benjamin, for the excellent job you did today, and thank everyone else. That was a great webcast. I could tell by all the questions and comments about it. And so thank you, and thank everyone else. I mean, thank you, everyone who joined us here today. And I did, switching slides here, I do have that, I think, that song to download. I was trying to open it earlier and my slides went crazy on me. If anyone wants to download that, you can just click on that link and download the great rap song by J. Chris Anderson and Claire McCabe. And that's about it. So I think I will, oh, the slides also. Let me see. Benjamin, we didn't talk about the slides. I know we're going to have a recording available shortly, but people are asking if they can get a copy of your slides. Would you mind if we, how would you like to do that? I can download a copy of the PDF, and if people want it, they can email me, and I'd be happy to give it to you. You can just email me at webcast@o'reilly.com. Okay. I'm sorry, I'm talking over you. Okay. Good. So, I'll just.
I usually Creative Commons my slides, so that's what these will be under at some point.
Okay.
Feel free to get them straight from the webcast at O'Reilly.
Okay. So just email me. That's no, not webcache. I'm sorry, I'm not enunciating. Webcast@o'reilly.com. and you'll reach me day or night at that email address. And yeah, setting it to modem does really make it less choppy. We just discovered that, and can't tell you how many people it saved the experience for them. The audio is just an ongoing issue, no matter which platform we use. No matter, it's webcasting, it's not perfect. When you have large groups, it gets trickier. So we thank everyone for bearing with us. So subject line, anything you like, just slides, and I'll send you the slide deck. Very casual. So thanks, everyone. And I don't know if anyone wanted to grab that song. I love this song. This is why I like the CouchDB webcast, so I can listen to this. All right, so we'll just, I'll close out the room in just a moment. And thanks, guys. Bye-bye.
Ping me on Twitter if you have any questions. Bye.
Thanks, Brian.